When little Emma Thompson's cries echoed through her Brookville home, her parents, Sarah and Michael, never imagined that the familiar family pit bull would turn from loyal companion to a weapon of tragedy. Within moments, their quiet life would spiral into a nightmare no one in the neighborhood could have predicted. Brookville, Ohio, was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone. Streets were lined with tidy houses, kids played freely in yards, and neighbors waved as they passed by. Life moved at a calm, predictable pace, and residents took comfort in the safety that small-town living often promised. That sense of security vanished one warm spring afternoon, leaving the community shaken and searching for answers. The emergency call came just after noon. A baby had been severely injured by a family pit bull. The responders arrived quickly, sirens cutting through the quiet neighborhood. Inside the house, the scene was chaotic. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize the child, but the injuries were catastrophic. The baby was rushed to the hospital, leaving the family and neighbors behind in stunned silence. News traveled fast. Soon, friends, neighbors, and even people from nearby towns were talking about the incident, trying to make sense of what had happened. For many, it was incomprehensible that something so terrifying could unfold in a home that had seemed ordinary, safe, and welcoming. Authorities cordoned off the area, and detectives began arriving to investigate the scene. Photographers and forensic specialists documented everything meticulously, taking measurements, photographs, and samples to reconstruct the sequence of events. Outside, neighbors gathered quietly, sharing hushed theories and expressing disbelief. Some couldn't believe the attack had come from a family pet, one they had often seen playing gently in the yard. Others wondered how quickly tragedy could strike in a place where life usually felt so secure. The pit bull, a large, muscular dog with a history of being friendly and calm, was now at the center of the investigation. It had been a part of the family for years, a companion often seen playing with the child under supervision. People couldn't reconcile the loving image of the dog with the violent attack that had occurred. While police worked inside, social media buzzed with conflicting reports and rumors began to circulate. Friends and family shared messages of shock, sorrow, and disbelief. The local hospital remained tight-lipped, giving only updates that kept the community on edge. Journalists started arriving, eager to report on the tragic event, adding to the tension and the sense that something deeply unsettling had disturbed the town. As night fell, the quiet streets seemed smaller and more vulnerable, the ordinary homes now marked by the shadow of fear. Families locked their doors, and parents held their children a little closer. Detectives continued their work, knowing that every detail could be crucial. They examined the home room by room, noting the placement of furniture, the position of the crib, and any signs that could reveal how the attack had unfolded. Something about the scene felt inconsistent, though at this stage it was hard to pinpoint exactly what. The town was left with a mix of grief, anger, and uncertainty, all underlined by the question that no one could answer yet: how could this happen in a place that had always felt so safe? The stage was set for an investigation that would unravel layers of mystery, and the community braced itself for revelations that might be more shocking than the tragedy itself. The investigation began with methodical precision as detectives moved carefully through the house, examining every corner for clues. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the weight of what had occurred. Every piece of evidence was photographed, cataloged, and analyzed. The placement of the crib, the position of the baby's clothing, and even the small marks on the floor became critical pieces of the puzzle. Officers interviewed family members one by one, recording their accounts and looking for inconsistencies. At first, everyone described a routine afternoon with the baby napping while the dog played nearby. The story seemed simple, even ordinary, but detectives noticed subtle contradictions. Statements about the timing of the nap, the dog's behavior, and who was present during the incident didn't always align perfectly. Even the most minor details took on significance in the detective's eyes. The dog itself was examined by animal behavior experts who assessed its temperament and training. They reviewed the dog's history, talking to veterinarians and neighbors who had interacted with it over the years. All signs pointed to a generally calm, well-cared-for animal, one that had never shown aggression toward children. Yet the evidence at the scene suggested a sudden, intense attack, leaving investigators with troubling questions. Forensic reports were ordered to determine the exact nature of the injuries and to reconstruct the sequence of events. Blood patterns, scratch marks, and other physical signs were analyzed in painstaking detail. Experts noted that some of the injuries did not match the typical patterns of a dog attack, raising the possibility that the situation was not as straightforward as it appeared. Outside the house, neighbors continued to speculate, offering their own interpretations based on what little they had seen. Some were convinced the attack was a tragic accident, a freak incident that could happen to anyone. Others suspected deeper problems within the household, recalling arguments, tension, or unexplained behavior in the days leading up to the tragedy. Detectives began to trace the family's recent activities, reviewing social media posts, messages, and interactions that might shed light on their private life. Financial records, medical histories, and past disputes with neighbors were also examined. Each piece of information, no matter how small, had the potential to reveal motives or circumstances that were previously hidden. As the investigation continued, the tension in the town grew. Parents kept their children close, conversations hushed and cautious, while the media reported updates that often left more questions than answers. Investigators worked around the clock, knowing that every hour could bring new leads or uncover evidence that would change the direction of the case entirely. Slowly, a picture began to form, one that suggested the attack might not have been a simple accident. The inconsistencies, the unusual injuries, and the timing of events hinted at a more complicated truth. Detectives faced the challenge of separating fact from assumption, piecing together a timeline that could explain the tragedy while remaining open to every possibility. The case demanded careful attention, patience, and an unwavering focus on the smallest details, each of which could be the key to understanding how a quiet afternoon had turned into a nightmare for one family and a town left searching for answers. As detectives continued to dig deeper, the investigation began to reveal layers of complexity that no one had anticipated. Initial impressions of a simple, tragic accident gave way to a more troubling picture. Interviews with extended family, friends, and neighbors uncovered details that had previously been overlooked. People spoke cautiously at first, reluctant to get involved, but slowly fragments of the family's private life emerged. There were whispers of tension between household members, financial struggles that had placed stress on parents, and arguments that, while not violent, hinted at frustration and anxiety building over time. Investigators also discovered past disputes with neighbors, small incidents that now seemed relevant in the context of what had happened. Forensic analysis added another layer of mystery. The injuries inflicted on the baby did not match a straightforward dog attack. Some marks suggested a level of force inconsistent with the animal's size and strength, raising questions about whether something else had contributed to the tragedy. Analysts studied blood patterns, scratches, and bruising in minute detail, reconstructing each movement to understand how the events had unfolded. Each new report prompted more questions than answers, forcing detectives to reconsider the initial assumptions about the attack. The dog's behavior, once considered calm and friendly, came under renewed scrutiny. Experts debated whether stress, provocation, or external interference could have caused a normally docile animal to act with such intensity. Investigators even considered whether the scene had been altered after the fact, whether someone might have manipulated evidence to make the incident appear accidental. As the days passed, detectives turned their attention to digital footprints. Phones, messages, social media activity, and browsing history were examined for clues that could indicate premeditation or a hidden influence on the events. Every detail was analyzed. From the time parents sent texts to neighbors' posts about unusual behavior in the days leading up to the attack. Each piece, no matter how small, was carefully evaluated for relevance. While some leads proved dead ends, others suggested that the story was far from complete. Evidence pointed to the possibility that someone may have been involved indirectly, creating conditions that triggered the attack. Investigators began to explore every angle, from accidental negligence to deliberate provocation. As the case grew more complicated, the community's anxiety increased. Residents struggled to reconcile the loving image of the family and their pet with the horror of what had occurred. Rumors spread, fueled by curiosity, fear, and the human need to understand tragedy. For detectives, the challenge was to remain focused on the facts, untangling emotions, assumptions, and speculation to uncover the truth. Each new discovery seemed to open another door, revealing hidden tensions, overlooked details, and unanswered questions. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer it became that what had seemed like a simple tragedy was actually a puzzle with many pieces. Some missing, some deliberately obscured, the search for answers demanded patience, persistence, and an unwavering attention to detail as detectives prepared for a breakthrough that might finally reveal the true circumstances behind the baby's devastating injury. Just when detectives thought they were beginning to understand the incident, a new and shocking lead emerged that changed everything. Security footage from a neighboring house, previously overlooked, revealed the presence of a stranger in the vicinity of the home around the time of the attack. The individual appeared to linger near the backyard, watching the house for several minutes before leaving as quietly as they had arrived. At first, it was unclear whether this person had any connection to the family, but the mere presence of an unknown figure introduced an entirely new dimension to the case. Investigators began tracking the stranger's movements, analyzing the footage frame by frame and cross-referencing it with neighborhood surveillance and traffic cameras. The person's identity was initially a mystery, but small details, the clothes they wore, the way they carried themselves, and subtle gestures helped narrow down potential leads. At the same time, detectives revisited the timeline of the attack, overlaying the footage with previous witness statements and phone records. They realized that some of the inconsistencies in the family's accounts could be explained by the stranger's presence. Questions began to arise about whether the individual had interacted with the dog in some way, intentionally or unintentionally, before the attack. Investigators dug into the stranger's background and discovered a history that raised serious concerns. The person had prior encounters involving aggressive animals and a pattern of erratic behavior, though there was no direct connection to the family. It seemed increasingly likely that someone with knowledge and intent had influenced the events, possibly using the dog as a weapon without the family's awareness. Neighborhood interviews added more pieces to the puzzle. Some residents recalled seeing an unfamiliar figure in the area in the days leading up to the incident. Others mentioned hearing unusual noises or noticing the dog acting strangely before the attack. These observations, previously dismissed as minor or coincidental, now took on new significance. The detectives also revisited the forensic evidence, comparing the injuries to what might have occurred if the dog had been provoked or manipulated. Patterns emerged that suggested the attack was not purely spontaneous. The injuries and positioning of the child indicated sudden and heightened aggression consistent with an external trigger. The possibility that the crime was premeditated, or at least influenced by an outside party, became increasingly plausible. As the investigation intensified, the community grew more anxious. People who had once felt safe in their homes now questioned who might be lurking nearby and what had motivated such a calculated intrusion. The detectives were faced with a race against time, knowing that every hour brought the potential for new leads but also for misinformation to spread. Each new discovery, each small clue, pointed toward a chilling conclusion: this tragedy may not have been an accident at all. The presence of the stranger, combined with the inconsistencies and unusual evidence, suggested a level of planning and intent that no one in the town had imagined. The investigation had shifted from a story of loss and misfortune to one of deliberate interference, and the detectives realized that the next steps could uncover truths far more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Through relentless investigation, detectives were finally able to identify the stranger captured on security footage. Digital records, neighborhood tips, and careful cross-referencing of sightings all led to a person with a history of obsession and unpredictable behavior. Once in custody, the individual's background revealed a pattern of grudges and personal vendettas, though none directly linked to the family until now. Under thorough questioning, it became clear that the stranger had been watching the household for weeks, studying routines, noting when the baby slept, and observing the dog's behavior. The motive was both personal and irrational. An old dispute with a relative of the family had festered over years, and the individual had chosen this particular household as a target of frustration, believing that causing chaos would somehow satisfy a long-standing grievance. Forensics and behavioral experts confirmed that the dog itself had not acted out of natural aggression. It had been provoked, manipulated in subtle ways to react violently, turning what might have been a harmless interaction into a fatal encounter. The attack, horrifying as it was, became a demonstration of how external influences could create devastating consequences. Authorities pieced together the events of that day. The stranger entered the backyard quietly, lured the dog toward the crib, and left just moments before the attack occurred. The evidence matched patterns in the injuries and the positioning of the baby, finally explaining the inconsistencies that had perplexed investigators. As the truth emerged, the community struggled to process the revelation. For weeks, residents had wrestled with the idea that the attack might have been a tragic accident, blaming themselves or the family for perceived lapses. Now, the reality was far more unsettling. The incident had been caused by a deliberate act of interference carried out by someone the town had never known existed. The family, already grieving, faced the complex emotions of understanding that the tragedy was not a result of negligence or the dog's nature, but of human intent. The pit bull, once feared, was cleared of any culpability, leaving behind a complicated mix of relief and sorrow. Experts emphasized the unusual nature of the case, highlighting how rare it was for someone to orchestrate such an event indirectly, using a family pet to inflict harm. The town slowly began to rebuild its sense of safety, though the memory of the incident remained vivid. Neighborhood routines were adjusted, security measures increased, and conversations shifted to awareness and vigilance. While life gradually returned to normal, the lessons of the case lingered. The unexpected presence of a stranger, hidden motives, and subtle provocations could transform ordinary life into unimaginable tragedy. In the end, the investigation served as a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that tragedies might have unseen forces behind them, and that the line between accident and intent could be thinner than anyone realized. The detectives' dedication had uncovered the truth, bringing closure to a case that had gripped the town in fear and uncertainty, and proving that meticulous investigation could reveal the full story, no matter how deeply it was buried.